So, it's the summer of 2000, and I'm 26 years old, and I've just spent the last 3 years designing and developing the rear suspension on the upcoming 2001 Chrysler minivan, the bread and butter of the Chrysler Corporation. And it's also the first time I've gone from start to finish on an entire design program. And so I poured my heart and soul into making sure that all the suspension components, the bushings and the brackets and the stabilizer bars were all making a smooth riding, good quality, cost-effective, and easily assembled design. 4.9 million of these minivans with my babies will be produced. And over the next 7 years, I get to watch them as they go down the road, because every time I'm following it, I can see my parts in action, and I get to admire them. So, I'm driving down the freeway near Detroit, and in front of me, I see one of these 2001 minivans, rusted out, beat up, bouncing up and down, with the shocks dragging behind sparks flying all over the freeway. And I thought, oh my gosh, how embarrassing. I've spent so much time and energy to design these parts, and here they'll be rotted and soon be in a landfill, leaching their toxins. The energy and materials wasted and my beautiful designs are now just another contributor to the deterioration of the planet. But that was what I called my minivan moment. And can you imagine how that might feel as a creative? It's hard enough managing all the challenges, the creative blocks, let alone deadlines, along with the environmental impacts. So, like me, your designs may one day end up in a landfill, unable to be recycled, biodegraded, or reused. Scientists estimate that we have only about 12 years left in order to make changes so that we can maintain a planet that we've become accustomed to since the Industrial Revolution. So, and 25% of that is due to making stuff. But I have this passion for preserving nature, and it stems back when my sister and I, we were kids growing up on 10 acres of wooded land, northern Michigan. And we used to ride our four-wheelers playing business with like fake business cards and our briefcases. And I had a tree fort that was a pretend spaceship. And there was even this like really cool clearing that was about a 25-foot clearing that was in this pine grove where I would often like sit in the sun and just reflect upon nature. And I think that really inspired me later on when I decided to be more eco-friendly, making my house more energy efficient. And as an engineer, I like totally geeked out on like solar energy and renewable energy and biodiesel. I even became a vegetarian as well, and shopping at Whole Foods, buying organics. And then I came across this book, Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature, by Janine Benyus. Has anybody read that book? All right. And is anybody familiar with biomimicry? Good. And I understand there was some people that were in the design challenge. Actually, I saw some online. Anybody who was on that one? No? All right, cool. All right, so would anybody like to do a quick definition of biomimicry? Go ahead.
Pulling the research and design that Mother Nature has done over the however many billion years of her existence, and then applying it to product systems, designs that we would generate.
Great, yeah. So biomimicry is this conscious emulation of nature to create sustainable and restorative designs. And there's a saying we use in biomimicry that says, life creates conditions conducive to life. And I spend my days looking how designs, through nature's inspiration, can also create conditions conducive to life. And it doesn't apply just to designs. It can apply to any aspect that you experience in your life. But I'm teaching you this so that you avoid your minivan moment, because I want to inspire you via the biomimicry methodology to reconnect with 3.8 billion years of design excellence so that your designs become role models for innovation as well as for being a restoration of the planet. So there's 4 aspects I'm going to cover tonight about the biomimicry thinking process, and that's scoping, discovering, creating, and evaluating. And so hopefully by the time we're done, I want you to be able to see that nature is a design partner. So the first aspect is scoping. So there I was, 14 years old, and standing in front of International Auto Works, which was a Volkswagen restoration shop. And towed to the shop was my beat-up 1975 Super Beetle that was leaking oil. It didn't stop because the brakes had failed, and a trail of rust was behind it. But that was okay. I was there to get it fixed. And so, just on a side note, since you guys don't know me, but I've had this obsession for Volkswagen Beetle since I was 2 years old, when my babysitter, who I called Rental, took me a ride in her red Volkswagen Beetle. And I find it real coincidental that here I'm talking about biomimicry and organisms, and my favorite car since I was a kid looks like a natural organism and is named after one. So back at the shop, Jim, the manager of the shop, said, I will show you how to restore it over the summer so that by the time you get your driver's license in the fall, it'll be ready to drive. So in order to understand the process of what he had to do to it, he started a series of questions. And it's like, what do you want to do with this car? Do you want to just drive it on the weekends, or do you want to drive it every day? Do you want to replace the parts with new parts? Are you trying to maintain the original design? Do you want heat? Because the path that the heat goes from the engine to the passenger compartment was rusted out. So all these things were really pivotal in me reaching my dream of actually owning a Volkswagen Beetle and being able to drive one. But these are also it was my first experience with scoping. And scoping is this very important first aspect of the biomimicry thinking process. And I'm sure you may be familiar with scoping because that's kind of what we do, but I think that the interesting thing about biomimicry is that it bridges the gap between nature and the challenge. So, and ask the question, what would nature do? And by properly scoping your challenge to clarify both the function and the context, then you open the door to discovering nature's champion adapters and deep patterns. So the first thing is what is the function of the challenge that you're working on? And really ask yourself, what would nature do that's similar? And then what is the context? What are the conditions under which your design takes place? So we're going to go just through an example here, is how would nature design some headlights? And you're not going to ask nature, how do you design headlights? Because clearly nature doesn't have headlights. But you can break it down into a function that might be, how does nature see, in the case of a raccoon at night? How does nature sense for the mantis shrimp? And then, how does nature illuminate? And there was an interesting article that came out that said that they found out they were able to improve LED performance from 50% to 90% for reflectivity due to studying the reflectability of the lantern on the Firefly. So that was just a recent thing that just came out, which is super cool. So then the context. The context is clearly when you're in nature, we're in the case of the headlight, what is the similarity that would make sense in nature? Such as, is it going to be during the daytime? Is it nighttime? In between? Are you going to have the headlights work when it's cold, hot, dry, wet? And the nice thing about most organisms is that they are subject to the same type of things that human designs are, which is the planet Earth. So I guess what I'd like you to think about is a challenge that you may be working on currently, and how would you frame that challenge into a function that might also be applicable in nature? And I'm just going to give you like 2 minutes just to think about this a little bit, and then if somebody's interested in sharing, we'll go a little more depth with it. So you got 2 minutes to think about it just for a second.
Can you rephrase that?
Sure. So if you're thinking about a design challenge that you might be working in, is looking at the challenge and consider what is the specific function that you're trying to solve with that challenge. And if it's a very large challenge, it may be something system, or you may have to choose a small aspect of that, and then rephrase that function that would then relate to something that nature would also do. Would anybody like to share?
Right now I'm working with foam,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just carving a very organic shape. Doesn't have to have any meaning. It just has to look very organic. And one of the things I guess nature does very well is erode. It's slow and steady over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I guess I would consider in my project. Not too hard, too fast. Slow and steady until I want a certain shape or a certain curve.
Cool. So, all right. So you got. Sorry. So carving a shape then.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
Organic shape.
okay.
Doesn't have to have some type of meaning.
Okay. So how does and what are some of the contexts that you might be doing this in?
I'm sorry.
Any conditions that you're going to be doing it in
Outside.
outside?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Just because of the mess I could cause.
That's true. Anybody else want to share something?
Yeah, working on a project with a group, and our challenge is to take up classification on the beach
Mm-hmm.
or ocean water. So I guess how would nature do it is like maybe how would they do waste management or cleaning or collecting.
Trying that same one. Was it specifically the beach or is it ocean? Ocean or anywhere, both?
Let's say Los Angeles River, or like
Okay. All right. Cool. All right, good. And we'll come back to these in a little bit. So the second aspect of the biomimicry thinking process is discovering. And since you guys are a lot of design students here, how many of you have been designing and sketching since you were a kid? No, okay. Good. So that's me as well. So when I was 10 years old, I designed this minivan front end that would angle down at high speeds, and then the whole front end would then come up when you would slow down, and I had this spoiler that would pop out the back. And then I was very excited about this. So my favorite car company at the time was Chrysler. And so I sent them off this design, and they said, thank you very much for your design, because our engineers do all these things. And here's a really cool Dodge Daytona brochure, which they're in 1984. Now, fast forward 13 years, and I was a packaging engineer for Chrysler in 1997. And I was working on the Dodge Intrepid ESX2 show car. And as a packaging engineer, I was responsible to make sure that the hybrid electric diesel powertrain and the passengers and the luggage and the batteries and all the components would all fit inside the design of the vehicle. And you may be surprised by this, but we actually used virtual reality back in 1997. We had put these goggles on, and we had these gloves that would then make sure that from the driver's seat that you could open the door and see the gauges through the steering wheel, and then manipulate a 7-Eleven Big Gulp into the cup holder. But the most important part of this vehicle was to make it class-leading in aerodynamics. And so what we did is spending a lot of time in the wind tunnel. You can see up at the top here, we had a deployable front air dam and side skirt. So here it's deployed, and then down at the bottom, it's retracted. So that design gave us a 0.19 coefficient of drag, which is the measurement for wind resistance through the air. And that is even actually a really good number today for a vehicle. And plus, we got a patent out of it. But that was all great. But what did we miss by not looking to nature to get some inspiration? And so if I had my biomimic hat on at the time, I may have scoped the problem as, how does nature manage flow? And then I would go into the discovering phase, and really, through the discovering, you're deep diving into the details of nature's patterns and champion adapters in order to really distill this common design language from the biology. And so when you're looking at really fast organisms, this is maybe a place where I might have started to look at how they move. And we've got the pronghorn antelope, which can run at 60 miles an hour due to some really interesting biomechanics in their muscles and their skeletal. The bottlenose dolphin is able to transfer the heat through its blubber to the outer layer of its skin. And in doing so, it heats the boundary layer of water and reduces the friction as it's moving through the water. And then the frigate bird is capable of 95 miles per hour flight, as well as can stay airborne the longest. And that's due to these really long wings and this really lightweight body. But by far my favorite would be the bat, because I think bats are really cool. They're the only mammal capable of winged flight, and they can hover, they can make 180-degree turns very quickly, and they use 25% less power than a bird. And to do so, what they do is they have these infinitely adjustable airfoils that on the wings are. And what they do is they get feedback from these little hairs right on the leading edge and the trailing edge of their wings. And that's how they're able to relay the information as far as is they're stalling or do they have enough lift. So this biology could have been translated into aerodynamic engineering language and then applied it to those really cool side skirts that we had talked about for the ESX2 show car, so that at various speeds and conditions it could have been even better than 0.19. But in a real life situation, the McLaren from 2012 was, according to Frank Stevenson, who is the designer for this, said that it was inspired by a falcon, a sailfish, and a cheetah. And you can see the inspiration from the sailfish. It has like the head is up front and it kind of tapers. You can see that with the value of the brainstorming around several of nature's design principles can really expand your solution space. So we're not going to be doing any brainstorming around these right now, but I think that some of the ideas that you may have come up with, I think it would be interesting to go back. And actually, if you're going anywhere on spring break that may incorporate a beach or have organisms or something really fun to do, then that's like the best time to just kind of see what stuff is available in nature to inspire whatever challenge that you're working on right now. So we've looked at scoping and discovering and creating. Then the fourth aspect of the biomimicry thinking process is evaluating. And so as I gained this experience in the suspension design world, I became this technical lead for suspension structures. So when engineers had questions about how to make structural components, they would inquire about the best ways for manufacturing and developing them. So the components that we worked on here includes the forgings, castings, tubular products, and stampings. But all of these use this age-old process of heat, beat, and treat. And what I mean by that is if you, for example, on a forging, you're heating up steel or aluminum to really high temperatures, and then you're beating it at high pressures. And then you have to reheat it to then cool it off again. And all of these processes, and often sometimes with a chemical cooling, then it becomes its optimal strength. With the castings, again, you're heating up the aluminum or the iron to high temperatures to liquid, and then putting it into mold. But then it has to be reheated up after it's formed to make sure that it gets to the higher strength that it needs to be. And then stampings, taking the flat sheet of aluminum or steel and then forming it under high mechanical pressures. And if I had that biomimicry insight when I was a technical lead, I would have looked to the aspect of evaluating in the biomimicry thinking process, because by evaluating your designs and making sure that you can make sure that they're sustainable and restorative, as well as answer the question, would nature do this? So in the scoping phase, just to clarify that again, in the scoping phase, we are asking what would nature do? But in this evaluating phase, we're actually looking at the design that you've made and said, would nature do this? And if I looked at these processes again, we got the heating of materials and to and use of electricity that burn fossil fuels that are releasing carbon dioxide as well as and contributing to climate change. And then we've got chemicals that are becoming toxic waste. And then the big thing here is that we're using these like top-down processes of taking these big chunks of material and then whittling them down into smaller things. And then there's all the scraps that is now just pre-consumer waste that never really became something. But when you look at nature and how it actually designs and manufactures things, it does it at atmospheric pressures, at ambient temperatures, and it does it from the bottom up. So the life creates conditions conducive to life. And I think it's really important that we remember that because if life didn't create conditions conducive to life, we wouldn't be here. So there's 6 main principles of this evaluating process in the biomimicry thinking. So the first one, evolve to survive, is where information is passed down along for continued performance. Adapt to changing conditions. Nature is optimizing its responses to dynamic contexts. To be locally attuned and responsive, it's fitting in with the surrounding environment. Integrating development with growth is optimally balancing the infrastructure with expansion. To be resource efficient through conservation of matter and energy. And then using life-friendly chemistries, chemistry that supports life. So I know there's a lot of detail in there, and it might be easier just to show an example of the turtle, because the turtle can encompass all of these factors. So in order to evolve to survive, this turtle has been replicating strategies that have worked and passed it down to generation to generation for 220 million years. To be locally tuned and responsive, the turtle has developed cooperative relationships with the surrounding environment, and it manages all the cyclical processes that it experiences. And it includes making its shell from readily available materials. So to be resource efficient, the shell is just a really interesting structure. So we have fitting the form to function is this shape, this hemispherical shape, and managing all the strength from the forces applied to that shell. It's hard to see in here, but it has these transverse ribs. This is a cross section of that turtle, and there's like this kind of ribs that go across it, and this is actually a cutaway of that rib. So this is a way for it to improve bending strength is through these transverse ribs. And these hexagonal, they're called scutes, but they're these little plates that make up that structure. And so this is basically, imagine this is one scute, and in between each of these scutes is this fingered interlocking fingers. So it has these interlocking fingers that allow it to expand and contract, but then when they bottom out and they lock in, it gives it the shell its strength. So then, in order to adapt to changing conditions, there's really these really important functions of variation, redundancy, and decentralization. So the shell has this layered structure that starts with this top keratin layer where the force, if you imagine this force is like a bite, it's puncture resistant, and it's kind of like a fingernail material, that keratin. And then the next layer here is these randomly oriented strengthening fibers. So that all these fibers are randomly oriented in a softer matrix, and that provides this overall strength of the structure. But the other thing that it does is by having all of this randomly placed, when a crack does start, it has to move all around and try to make its way, and it causes a crack to run out of energy because it's zigzagging all over the place. And then the foam layer. Yeah, nature uses a lot of this porous and structural foam, which basically gives it like this section height, but without adding a lot of weight. And it also, with all these voids in here, this provides another path. If a crack happens to make it from this point to this one, when it hits one of these voids, it stops because it has no place to go. So this is part of that effect where it's redundant. It has two ways to stop the crack. And then the last portion is this lower level, which is the fibers are now oriented exactly at 90 degrees, and that strengthens the entire shell in two directions, so just transversely and across. So to integrate balance, to integrate development with growth, it's clearly that the shell, the hard shell and the soft internals, the two grow in tandem, and then there's not one that's bigger than the other. So, and then building or using life-friendly chemistry, the shell is made from these very simple components of oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon, just very simple ones, and then some minerals. And they're all non-toxic elements. All of this structure is built at room temperature or sea temperature and under pressures that are basic atmospheric pressures. So when it comes to the design challenges that you may have been thinking about having scoped and discovered, and then eventually create against, it's important to reevaluate all of these with the 6 main life principles and ask yourself, would nature do this? So this is what I want you to remember about the biomimicry thinking methodology. The scoping clarifies the function and the context to bridge the gap between your challenge and 3.8 billion years of design excellence. Discovering reveals nature's challenges that are, champion adapters and deep patterns, and then translates it into this common design language that can be used for further creation. And creating quiets down, and that is part of allowing the water to stay attached. But it also applies, it's also applicable in air. And that's kind of how the car is designed, with this very large front end that then tapers to the back. The scales on it are these triangular arrow-shaped bumps all along its body. And so they mimic that on the mirror. And these bumps allowed for the wind to delay separation and prevent turbulence and wind noise around the A-pillar. As well as they also put these bumps in the intake. And what that did is it increased the cooling performance and the airflow by 17%. So looking back to the challenges over here, and the ones that you may have been thinking about yourself, is to just brainstorm a little bit around what organisms could possibly do what you're thinking about. So, and it's okay if you don't know, because we're not all biologists, and either I'm an engineer, so I've been learning about biology, but you might know a naturalist, you might know a biologist. You can go to the zoo, you can go to a natural history museum, or you can always go online and look at asknature.org. It's a very, very good site. But if you look back at some of these here, so how does nature erode? Some things, does anybody have some ideas that might? Sure. Termites, yeah, that's good, a very good one. Anybody else? Rivers. So some things that also come to mind is some organisms that, like any sort of like ground-moving organisms, snakes, worms, they're kind of leaving this trail, snails. And then as far as cleaning waste, so anybody would like to throw out some ideas for how does nature clean the waste? Or manage waste? What was that? Mushroom? Ah, yeah, that's a good one. Mushrooms. What was that? Pollen? Oh, yeah, totally. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Whales, like they're baleen?
The baleen, yeah, those are really cool. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that looks good, right? What was that? Rain? Yeah, definitely. Like the liver or the detoxing. Yep. So whenever we do a full biomimicry process, we come up with 100 or so organisms, and then we're looking at all the details of how they break down, all the mechanisms. So it's kind of the fun thing when it starts going, especially if you just went to a zoo and you're just like looking like, oh, it does this and does this and does this. So it can get very exciting. As you see the value of scoping and discovering, the third aspect of the biomimicry thinking process is the creating phase. And so in 2010, I was tasked with putting the whole suspension on the 1,500-pound Ram pickup on a 20-pound diet. And so the suspension parts that had to be redesigned were the top purple upper control arm, this lower green lower control arm, and all the 5 blue links in the rear. And it was kind of like the first time that we took weight out of a truck, because a truck is supposed to just deal with the load. But this time, I only had less than 2 years out of a normal 3-year process to redesign these parts and still meet all the requirements. But luckily, there's this really cool topology optimization program. And I'm not sure how many of you may have heard of topology optimization. It is this program that will take, by giving it the design space that you're planning to design, and then you put in the parameters for road input as well as the constraints on the system, it will build, based on this loading, an approximation of what the design should look like. So this is kind of the initial output that it provides. And then it has to be massaged in CAD in order to actually come up with a part that you can make. So this is the actual part that was developed in the bottom. But the cool part is the making of the rough shape, because obviously, and so you may have heard that going to the gym and working out with gym weights will actually improve bone density and strength of the bones, and that's actually how the software works. It takes a look at, it was mimicked after how human bones grow. And so it'll add material where there's a load and remove the material where it is not. And so that's great, but it's also really sensitive to the inputs and the constraints that you put on it. And so blindly accepting the results may not be the optimal design. So that's where creating with biomimicry thinking could really brainstorm around these back-of-the-napkin concepts that could then, with nature's genius, provide some improved solutions to this. So if I had my biomimicry hat on at the time, and I had used this program since 2010, and I knew what biomimicry was, but I had no idea that it was biomimicry. So kind of blindly using it. But if we look at the bird feather is the center vein on the bird feather here is then this long cross section here. And then these are the different cross sections along the length of the feather. So it's really cool that it starts out with this round and hollow section, and then it transitions into square sections that have ribs along the top and the bottom for added bending strength, as well as this cellular closed cell foam material in the center, which gives it the structure with lightweight. But it also has these thin sides, and it has to do with exactly this type of loading, the downward force of the wings flapping, and then the torsion that they also experience. So in biomimicry, we would take this, and then we design something that's void of any biology to try to pick apart these really important details. And so we've got a similar thing. Now we're just looking at a cylinder that has a round section to start with the thick upper thin sides, and then it has the ribs along the length with the closed cell foam in the center. And so then from here, this is when the creating phase really gets exciting, because here is where you get to really brainstorm around these ideas. And so one of the ideas that we did come up with here on I can't tell you what program it is, but the company starts with an F and ends with an A. So it's mimicked after the bird feather with a extruded top section, two different extruded sections with this composite center that is similar to the foam. And so this information here then could have been put into the topology optimization program that is using the bone growth. So in a sense, we're doing a chimera. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the chimera or the term, because I had no idea what this was until recently. It's basically combining, mixing and matching of design elements, and the mythical jackalope is one such organism. And so then this idea of this chimera could totally be used, and it is used by this company Elise in Germany. And they use the topology optimization program with, this up here is a diatom, which is these single cell marine organisms that have like really cool shapes. This is just one of them, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them. And then they combine that with a tree and how it branches out. And they were able to come up with this A-pillar design for Volkswagen that includes the diatom and the tree branching. And this was all done with the same topology program that I showed earlier that you could have just let it do it automatically. This is actually trying to inform it with biomimicry to go the next step. So, the human cleverness, to allow nature's genius to inspire sustainable and restorative designs. And then evaluating ensures that your designs say yes to the question, would nature do this? So I encourage you to embrace biomimicry as a design partner so you minimize your minivan moments. And get outside to reconnect with nature, dream up ideas that are inspired by nature's design wisdom, and be the spark that regenerates the planet Earth.